The courtroom doors swung open with a force that echoed through the marble halls of justice. What happened next would send shockwaves through the entire state and expose the ugly truth about privilege, power, and the price of arrogance. It started on a rainy Tuesday evening at Morton's Steakhouse, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the capital. Thomas Whitmore III, the 24-year-old nephew of Governor Richard Whitmore, had been drinking heavily with his college friends. They were celebrating, or rather, Thomas was celebrating himself. He'd just landed a position at his uncle's consulting firm, a job everyone knew he hadn't earned. At the next table sat Colonel Henry Morrison, a 72-year-old decorated veteran who had served 3 tours in Vietnam and spent his retirement volunteering at the VA hospital. The colonel was having a quiet dinner with his wife of 50 years, Margaret, celebrating their anniversary. When Thomas's group became loud and disruptive, Colonel Morrison politely asked them to lower their voices. What happened next was captured on multiple cell phones. Thomas stood up, swaying slightly, and sneered at the elderly veteran. "Do you know who I am, old man? My uncle is the governor. I can do whatever I want in this town." When the colonel calmly responded that respect wasn't determined by connections, Thomas snapped. He grabbed his drink and threw it in the veteran's face, then shoved the elderly man backward. Colonel Morrison fell hard, his head striking the corner of the table. Blood pooled on the floor as Margaret screamed for help. The restaurant erupted in chaos. Witnesses immediately called 911. Thomas tried to leave, but several diners blocked his path until police arrived. As EMTs loaded the unconscious colonel into an ambulance, Thomas smirked at the cameras already gathering outside. "This is nothing," he told reporters. "You'll see, this will all go away by morning." Colonel Morrison suffered a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. The community wasn't just angry, they were furious. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Protests formed outside the governor's mansion. Veterans groups demanded justice. The pressure was immense. The governor's office released a careful statement expressing concern for Colonel Morrison's health but refusing to comment on ongoing legal matters. Everyone knew what that meant. They were going to try to make this disappear. The district attorney, however, had other plans. She filed charges immediately: aggravated assault, battery of an elderly person, and public intoxication. Thomas was released on bail within hours, posting the $50,000 without blinking. As he left the police station, Thomas addressed the cameras with the same arrogance. "This is a misunderstanding. The old man provoked me. My lawyers will handle this, and I'll be cleared by next week." The city watched. The nation watched. And they waited. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. Everyone expected a plea deal, a settlement, maybe some community service that would never be served. After all, this was the governor's nephew. The fix was surely in. But a revelation inesperada estaba presta medar todo no tribunal. The courthouse was packed to capacity on the morning of the trial. News vans lined the street. Veterans in uniform stood in silent protest outside, holding signs that read, "Justice for Colonel Morrison," and "No one is above the law." Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Every seat was filled. Veterans, concerned citizens, reporters, and curious onlookers who wanted to see if justice would truly be served. Judge Robert Chen entered at exactly 9 a.m. At 58 years old, Judge Chen had presided over some of the state's most important cases for the past 15 years. He was known for his measured temperament, his fairness, and his unwavering commitment to the law. His black robe seemed to carry the weight of every decision he'd made, every life he'd impacted. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Chen took his seat, his dark eyes scanning the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone who missed nothing. He had reviewed every piece of evidence, watched the videos, read the witness statements. He knew exactly what kind of case this was, and exactly what kind of defendant he was dealing with. "Be seated," he said calmly. "Let's begin." When Thomas Whitmore III entered the courtroom, he looked like he was walking into a country club rather than facing felony charges. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored, his hair styled with precision. He wore a slight smirk as he nodded to a few people in the gallery, as if this were all a formality he had to endure before getting back to his real life. His legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from the most prestigious firm in the state, the kind of lawyers most people couldn't afford for a single consultation, let alone a trial. The lead attorney, Marcus Sheffield, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, my client is a young man who made a mistake in a moment of poor judgment. He deeply regrets." "Save your opening statement, Mr. Sheffield," Judge Chen interrupted, his voice even but firm. "We'll follow proper procedure here." The prosecution presented their case methodically. The videos were played. They showed everything: Thomas's aggression, his words, the assault, his complete disregard for an elderly man's dignity. Gasps filled the courtroom as people watched the colonel fall. Witnesses testified: the restaurant manager, the couple at the next table, the EMTs who responded. Each painted the same picture: an entitled young man who believed his family name gave him the right to abuse others. Then Colonel Morrison took the stand. Despite his injuries, the colonel walked to the witness box with military bearing. His left arm was still in a cast. The bruises on his face had faded to yellow and green, but they were still visible. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened. The colonel spoke clearly, without embellishment, stating only the facts. When asked how the incident had affected him, he paused. "I served my country for 30 years, he said quietly. "I've been shot at, I've seen friends die, I've endured things most people can't imagine. But I never thought that in my own country, in my own city, I'd be assaulted for simply asking for common courtesy. What hurt most wasn't the physical pain, it was the complete lack of respect for human dignity." The courtroom was silent. When the defense's turn came, Thomas took the stand against his attorney's advice. He couldn't help himself. He needed to be heard. "Look, I was having a good time with my friends," Thomas said, leaning back casually. "This guy starts lecturing us like we're children." He was condescending. "Sure, maybe I overreacted a little, but he shouldn't have gotten involved in the first place." The prosecutor stood. "Mr. Whitmore, did you throw your drink in Colonel Morrison's face?" "He was being disrespectful to me." "Did you push a 72-year-old veteran, causing him to fall and sustain serious injuries?" "It was barely a push. He fell because he's old and unsteady." "That's not my fault." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the courtroom. Judge Chen leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, do you take any responsibility for what happened that night?" Thomas shrugged. "I think this whole thing has been blown out of proportion because of who my uncle is. If I were anyone else, this wouldn't even be in court." The judge's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I see. Mr. Sheffield, do you have any further questions for your client?" The attorney, looking uncomfortable, shook his head. "No, Your Honor." As Thomas stepped down from the stand, he caught the eye of someone in the back of the courtroom and gave a small, confident nod. He was sure this would all work out. It always did. Judge Chen reviewed his notes silently. The courtroom held its breath. Everyone knew this was the moment. Would justice prevail, or would privilege win again? The judge looked up, his gaze steady. "Before I proceed to closing arguments, I need to address something." And then someone stood up at the back of the courtroom. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s stood up from the back row. He had been sitting there the entire trial, unnoticed by most, wearing civilian clothes and keeping his head down. Chief of Police Michael Whitmore, Thomas's father. Not just any police officer, the chief of police for the entire metropolitan area, one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the state. A man who commanded respect from thousands of officers, who had dedicated 30 years to upholding the law. And the older brother of Governor Richard Whitmore. Judge Chen's eyes met the chief's across the crowded courtroom. "Chief Whitmore," the judge said, "I wondered if you'd be here." "Your Honor." Chief Whitmore's voice was steady but heavy with emotion. "May I approach?" "You may." Every head turned as the chief walked down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the silent room. Thomas's confident smirk began to fade as he watched his father approach the bench. Judge Chen nodded. "Chief, you're not here as a witness. Would you like to address the court?" "If it please the court, Your Honor, I would." "Proceed." Chief Whitmore turned to face the gallery, his jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man making the hardest decision of his life. "For the past 3 weeks, I've received calls from my brother, from colleagues, from family friends, all telling me to handle this situation. To use my position to protect my son. To make this go away." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I've spent 30 years enforcing the law. 30 years telling my officers that the badge means something, that we serve justice, not power. That no one is above the law." He turned to look at Thomas, who suddenly looked very small in his expensive suit. "I have failed as a father," the chief continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I gave my son everything, opportunities, education, comfort. But I failed to teach him the most important lessons, humility, respect, and accountability. I was too busy with my career, and I let others spoil him. I let him believe that our family name was a shield instead of a responsibility." Thomas's face had gone pale. "When I watched that video of what my son did to Colonel Morrison, a decorated veteran, a man who served this country with honor, I was ashamed. Deeply, profoundly ashamed. Not just of what Thomas did, but of the young man I allowed him to become." The chief turned back to Judge Chen. "Your Honor, I'm here to tell you, and to tell this courtroom, and to tell my son, I will not interfere in this case. I will not use my position to protect him from the consequences of his actions. And I will not allow my brother, the governor, to do so either." Gasps filled the courtroom. Thomas stood up abruptly. "Dad, what are you?" "Sit down, Thomas." The command was sharp, and Thomas sat. The chief's voice softened slightly. "I love my son. I will always love him. But love doesn't mean protecting someone from facing the truth. Real love means allowing them to learn, to grow, to become better than they are." He turned to Colonel Morrison, who sat in the front row beside his wife. "Colonel Morrison, I cannot undo what my son did to you. I cannot take away your pain or erase that night. But I want you to know that I am sorry. I'm sorry for raising a son who thought he could treat you, treat anyone, with such disrespect." The colonel nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Chief Whitmore looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, I ask that you apply the full weight of the law in this case. My son needs to understand that actions have consequences. He needs to learn accountability. And frankly, society needs to see that justice applies equally to everyone, regardless of their last name or their connections." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters frantically typed on their phones. The attorneys at the defense table looked stunned. Thomas's face had gone from pale to red. He stood again, his voice breaking. "Dad, you can't do this to me. I'm your son. You're supposed to protect me." The chief turned to face him directly, and for the first time, tears were visible in his eyes. "I am protecting you, Thomas. I'm protecting you from becoming a monster. I'm protecting you from a life where you never learn, never grow, never become the man you could be. This," he gestured to the courtroom, "this is the greatest act of love I can give you right now. Thomas sank back into his chair, his arrogance finally shattered. For the first time since the trial began, he looked like what he truly was, a scared young man who had finally realized that the world wasn't going to bend to his will. Judge Chen sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just transpired. Then he spoke, his voice carrying a rare note of emotion. "Chief Whitmore, in my 15 years on the bench, I have never witnessed a display of integrity quite like what you've just shown. You've reminded everyone in this courtroom what true honor looks like." The chief nodded, then returned to his seat. But before sitting down, he looked at his son one more time and mouthed the words, "I love you." Judge Chen straightened in his chair. "We will now proceed to sentencing." The courtroom held its breath once more. This time, everyone knew, justice was about to be served. Judge Robert Chen removed his glasses and set them carefully on the bench. He looked at Thomas Whitmore III, who now sat hunched in his chair, all traces of arrogance gone, replaced by fear and the dawning realization of consequences. "Mr. Whitmore, please stand," the judge said. Thomas stood on shaky legs, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he no longer fit into. His attorneys stood with him. Judge Chen began, his voice measured and clear. "This court has heard compelling evidence of a violent assault against an elderly veteran who was simply trying to enjoy a peaceful evening with his wife. We've watched video evidence that leaves no doubt about what transpired. We've heard from witnesses. And we've heard from you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. "What troubles me most, Mr. Whitmore, is not just the violence you committed, though that alone is serious enough. What troubles me is the complete absence of remorse you displayed until moments ago. You came into this courtroom believing that your family connections would shield you from accountability. You showed contempt for this court, for the victim, and for the very concept of justice." Thomas's head dropped lower. "However," Judge Chen continued, "I have also witnessed something extraordinary today. Your father, Chief Whitmore, has shown this court what true integrity looks like. He has chosen justice over nepotism, principle over privilege. His actions today have given me hope that you might still learn the lessons you so desperately need to learn." The judge opened a folder before him. "Thomas Whitmore III, you have been found guilty of aggravated assault of an elderly person, battery, and public intoxication. These are serious crimes that demand serious consequences." The courtroom was utterly silent. "I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison," Judge Chen declared. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Thomas's knees buckled slightly, and his attorney steadied him. "However," the judge raised his hand, "I am suspending 3 years of that sentence. You will serve 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Thomas. "During your probation, you will complete 2,000 hours of community service at the VA hospital, serving the very veterans you showed such disrespect for. You will attend weekly counseling sessions to address your sense of entitlement and learn accountability. You will issue a public apology to Colonel Morrison and his family. And you will have no contact with alcohol for the duration of your probation." The judge's voice hardened. "If you violate any single condition of your probation, you will serve the remaining 3 years in prison without exception. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't hear you, Mr. Whitmore." "Yes, Your Honor," Thomas said louder, tears now streaming down his face. Chief Whitmore stood from the back of the courtroom and walked forward. "Your Honor, may I add something?" "Yes, Chief." The chief looked at his son. "Thomas, effective immediately, you are cut off financially. No more trust fund, no more allowances, no more family money. When you're released from prison, if you want to rebuild your life, you'll do it through your own work, your own effort. I will help you learn, but I will not enable you any more." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Judge Chen then turned to Colonel Morrison. "Colonel, Would you like to address the court? The elderly veteran stood slowly, Margaret helping him to his feet. He walked to the center of the courtroom, facing Thomas directly. "Young man," the colonel began, his voice steady, "you hurt me. You humiliated me. You caused my wife terrible distress. For weeks I was angry at you, angry at the system that I thought might let you go free." He paused. "But I'm also a man of faith, and I believe in redemption. I believe that people can change if they choose to. Your father has given you an incredible gift today, the gift of accountability. Whether you receive it as such or see it as punishment is up to you." The colonel's eyes softened slightly. "I don't know if you'll use these next few years to become a better man. But I hope you will. I hope you'll learn that real strength isn't about connections or money or intimidation. It's about character, respect, and service to others." He extended his uninjured hand toward Thomas. "I forgive you, and I'll pray for you." Thomas broke down completely. He crossed the space between them and shook the colonel's hand, then did something no one expected. He pulled the elderly veteran into a gentle embrace and sobbed on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," Thomas choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry." The colonel patted his back. "I know, son. I know." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Chief Whitmore approached and gently took his son's arm. "Come on, Thomas. It's time." As the bailiffs led Thomas away to begin his sentence, he turned back one more time to look at his father. The chief placed his hand over his heart, and Thomas did the same. No words were needed. Judge Chen addressed the courtroom one final time. "Let today's proceedings serve as a reminder. Justice is not selective. The law applies equally to all. And sometimes the hardest decisions we make, the ones that break our hearts, are the ones that ultimately heal us." He struck his gavel. Court is adjourned. Epilogo. 18 months later. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the VA hospital's rehabilitation wing. Thomas Whitmore III, wearing simple scrubs and a volunteer badge, carefully helped Mr. Patterson, an 81-year-old Korean War veteran, into his wheelchair. "Easy does it, sir," Thomas said gently. "We're not in a rush." "You're getting better at this, young man," Mr. Patterson smiled. "When you first started here, you were stiff as a board. Afraid to touch anyone." Thomas chuckled softly. "I was afraid of a lot of things back then." He had been released from prison 4 months ago after serving his full sentence with good behavior. The man who emerged from those prison walls was nothing like the arrogant kid who had entered. Prison had been brutal, humbling in ways he never imagined. He'd been just another inmate, his last name meaning nothing except putting a target on his back. But the real transformation had come from his work at the VA hospital. Every day, he served men and women who had sacrificed everything for their country. He heard their stories. He learned their names. He understood, finally, what honor actually meant. Colonel Morrison had visited him twice during his imprisonment. The first time, Thomas had been too ashamed to speak. The second time, they had talked for 2 hours about life, purpose, and second chances. Now, Thomas worked at the VA hospital 40 hours a week, well beyond his required community service hours. He had enrolled in night classes to become a certified nursing assistant. His father visited every Sunday, and slowly, painfully, they were rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty and accountability. The trust fund money was gone. Thomas lived in a small apartment and drove a used car he'd bought with his own savings. And he had never been happier. As he wheeled Mr. Patterson toward the therapy room, he saw a familiar figure entering the building. Colonel Morrison, here for his weekly volunteer shift as well. The colonel now helped counsel younger veterans dealing with PTSD. Their eyes met across the hallway. The colonel smiled and nodded. Thomas smiled back. "That the old man you assaulted?" Mr. Patterson asked directly. Veterans didn't mince words. "Yes, sir," Thomas replied honestly. "That's Colonel Morrison. And he's the man who taught me what forgiveness really means." "Good man, that colonel. And you're becoming a good man too, son. Keep at it." As Thomas continued down the hallway, he passed a mirror and caught his own reflection. The person looking back was someone he finally respected. Not because of a last name or family connections, but because of the work he'd done to earn that respect, from others and from himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Proud of you, son." "Dinner this Sunday?" Thomas smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it, Dad. Thank you for saving my life." Because that's exactly what his father had done that day in court. Chief Whitmore hadn't destroyed his son. He had destroyed the arrogant, entitled person his son had become, making space for the man Thomas was meant to be. Justice hadn't been about punishment. It had been about transformation. And Thomas Whitmore III, once the governor's arrogant nephew, was finally learning what it meant to be a man of character, humility, and service. The path forward wouldn't be easy. He still had years of probation, thousands of hours of service ahead. But for the first time in his life, he was walking that path with purpose, dignity, and genuine respect for others. The courtroom doors had closed on one version of Thomas Whitmore. But they had opened on someone far better.